Angular grew of awesomeness. That's what I think it says that on the but Mike, he grew up in New Orleans. He came here about 12 years ago, and he said that he has not yet naturalized to Utah quite yet, but he's getting there. It's going to take some time. But Mike has been doing software development for over 15 years. He's been at SEC for about 5 now, and he's great to work with. He's an awesome presenter, and I cannot wait for what's to come. You'll never see that stuff, but I just spoke off the up this morning. It's what's coming through. So I'm really excited. Mike's a great speaker, and it's going to be awesome for us to learn a little more about Angular. So let's give it up for Mr. Mike.
Can you guys in the back hear me okay? Okay, good. I have access to the house mic, but I'd rather not use it if we can avoid it. So at several points during the presentation, we'll open it up for questions. Please remind me, I have a terrible habit of not repeating the question that's been asked to me, which means the people that are watching remotely don't hear it. They just hear me babbling on about some question they never heard. It's kind of like Jeopardy, I guess. But so always fun to open up with a shot at the PC users. I'm actually running a Mac here behind the scenes. But now if we can get the house quiet here, got a little intro that Martha is very, very excited about indeed. So sorry, you're gonna have to live with my audio. We couldn't hook into the house audio for this part. All right, unfortunately, I can never live up to an opening crawl for Star Wars, so it's all downhill from here. But the first point we should talk about is what is Angular? And you may have inferred this from the title of the presentation. I saw an NG-Comp shirt. Did you this year? Did you go? Yeah. Did you get the socks this year? No. The socks. I'm sporting Angular socks today. I found them in my, no, unfortunately, I did not. Next year, I think, we went the bikini briefs or the tidy whities. That would take a few drinks to get me to show you the ones I'm wearing. And I am from New Orleans, as we pointed out, which is much easier to get in that state of mind in New Orleans than it is here. So one of the things they touched on at Angular, or NG-Comp rather, is they're trying to rebrand Angular a little bit. So they're referring to the legacy, that is 1X, as AngularJS. And from here on out, everything Angular 2+ will just be referred to as Angular and will be backwards compatible. And of course, you probably know Angular is not backwards compatible with AngularJS. There's a clean break there, although, as you'll see, a lot of the concepts are very familiar. So Angular is the new Angular indeed. AngularJS is Angular 1, and Angular is now Angular 2+. And Google was so excited about it, they clean skipped Angular 3 and went right to Angular 4, as you may know. So in the presentation today, we'll look a little bit what's under the hood and a lot of tooling that's used with Angular. So here's the basic stack. You know, you've got Angular in the front. TypeScript, it's who by show of hands, who is familiar at least to some degree with TypeScript? Okay, we'll try not to leave you behind. I think if you're not, some of the code examples will be presented in TypeScript, but feel free to raise your hand. I can slow down and convert any example code to plain old JavaScript so we can have a look at it. Angular CLI, which is a set of tools meant to make your life much, much easier. it's straight up tooling. It's Angular's command line interface. Webpack runs under the hood. You might see it mentioned if you're picking through some of the files in your project. If you don't want to, though, you never have to deal with it directly. So if you don't know Webpack, don't sweat it at all. NPM, you're probably all familiar with, lovingly known as Node Package Manager, but that's not the official name. Karma and Protractor are both testing frameworks. And then in our sample code, you may see some references to Angular Fire and Firebase, which are not, those are not particular to Angular. They're just some things I used in the sample project, which we may or may not look at. If we have time, we might just build something, or I can walk you guys through an existing application that I built as kind of a sample. So we'll leave that up to you guys towards the end of the presentation. So here's kind of a side-by-side comparison of Angular JS and Angular. Kind of what is a little bit different about each. JavaScript versus TypeScript, of course. In Angular JS, you had the option to either use the ng-app directive or bootstrap your project with code directly. That option's gone now. You must bootstrap using a root component, which we'll get to a little bit later. You're probably very familiar with promises if you've used Angular JS. And you may still do so in Angular, but the preferred solution is observables. And I would hope to demonstrate to you, I probably don't have enough time to do it justice, but observables, you might hit a bit of a speed bump if you're trying to use them, if you're coming from promises, but it is well worth the investment of time. You're probably very familiar, unfortunately, with $scope if you're developed code in Angular. That results in a lot of spaghetti code and $scope, parent scope. Anybody ever come across code like that? Come on, nobody? No. It doesn't have to be your own code. It's now you call out your buddy, right? So that's been completely abstracted away. So I'm glad not to have to deal with that anymore. Everything is now a component in Angular, as opposed to directives and controllers have been kind of merged into one thing. And if you've followed John Papa's, anybody familiar with John Papa? I won't bore you with. Okay, good. He's John Papa and Dan Moline. Their best practices do recommend using the .component method, which kind of was meant to steer people towards Angular 2. It was a best practice to kind of merge the idea of a controller and a directive. Filters are no more. They are now referred to as pipes, which makes way more sense because there was a filter in Google. So it's good to get rid of that little bit of ambiguity. Deeper comparison there at that URL. And if you're trying to furiously take these down later, don't worry about it. I'm going to post a link to these slides later so you guys can just pull anything you want out of them. So with the break between Angular JS and Angular, why not jump ship? Why not go to something new? There are plenty of other libraries and frameworks out there, and that is certainly a viable option to explore something else. I'm not here to sell you guys on Angular. I'm just going to present it as an option. There are certainly many other great frameworks and libraries out there. Aurelia is a kind of analogous to Angular and was founded by someone that worked on Angular previously. So that is certainly something you might want to check out. React has gotten a lot of traction. They just did a complete rewrite, kind of on the order of magnitude that Angular did. So definitely a good time to check that out. I understand it has great tooling, just like Angular does with the Angular CLI. So what, you might ask, is the difference between a framework and a library? Well, a library works for you, and you work for a framework, unfortunately. I mean, you kind of have to accept Angular standards or Ember or Aurelia or whatever framework you're working in and work within those paradigms, whereas you can generally make a library work for you. React, Backbone, jQuery, those things can be worked into any project pretty easily, whereas unless you have a green field, it's kind of difficult to get to work with Angular or any other kind of framework like that. Not impossible. So if you really want to try Angular in your middle of an existing project, there is a road ahead for you. It's just not as easy as starting a project from scratch. Well, and there, I think I pretty much already said that. Okay, so what is so great about Angular? Well, first of all, I think that's enough said, right? And there's also no trans fat in Angular. I don't even know what that is. It just seems to be touted lately, so I figured I would include it. One of the first benefits of Angular is TypeScript, which I bounced off of it first. You know, I didn't want to have to learn something else. But with about 2 hours, I was very comfortable writing code in TypeScript. And I got over there was some stigma about it in the circles I ran in. I think mainly just old codgers that, like me, didn't want to try something new. But once you get over that, there's so much benefit. I think just for TypeScript alone, I would jump ship and go to Angular. But you can do TypeScript in practically any framework or library these days. So, and I think you're probably doing yourself a disservice by not at least having a good look at TypeScript. For one, there are template strings which make string concatenation a breeze. It's kind of a pain building up a string in any language, but this makes it pretty easy. You get sort of type safe, mostly type safe from TypeScript. You can still get into the weeds with pretty much in testing. This is kind of the worst place where you're mocking things. The compiler doesn't necessarily know how to type check your code as well as it does in production code. Usually better IDE from IDE help. By show of hands, Eclipse guys, IntelliJ. Something else? Just shout it out. VS Code. Okay. Oh, well, why don't you come up and give the presentation? They have much better support for Angular. Probably even IntelliJ is my weapon of choice. But VS Code, from what little I've looked at, looks like it's got fantastic support for Angular. And one would expect that with TypeScript under the hood, and TypeScript being Microsoft's product. A lot more modularity. By show of hands again. Object-oriented developers. Okay. TypeScript's going to feel like home. You're not going to have to chase a bug down a rabbit hole for 3 days because you made one typing error or one typo. Downsides, though, of course, that it's another thing you have to learn amongst all the other acronyms that you've picked up over the years. But again, well worth the time. The code must transpile. So it is a superset of JavaScript, meaning it adds functionality to JavaScript, but plain old JavaScript runs just fine in a TypeScript context. It requires mapping files for debugging, and you can even include those. Your browser will slurp them up and let you debug code runtime. So I love TypeScript. I'm completely sold on it. I hope to never look back. And perhaps you're not as excited about it, but I would suggest that if you're not, it is worth another look. Name that movie? Okay, well, incoming. So there's another link that's obviously way too small for you to read. Don't worry about it. I'll post the link to the slides later. So why TypeScript? Well, I think I pretty much already covered this, but let's see. Yeah, and there you go. That's kind of at the heart of it. One of the things you can get rid of by writing ES6 compliant or TypeScript code. This is examined in the context of execution, not in the context of compilation or development time, right? So who's run into this problem before where you're using this, references to this, and this is not this, this is that, or this is some other thing. This is not always this in JavaScript, unfortunately. Well, you can get rid of that with TypeScript. Using the timer method, I did bounce into some issues once, but it was my mistake. But other than that, I've had no run-ins at all with this in TypeScript. There are some, again, this gets back to the stigmas I was talking about. It had circulated about the time I looked at TypeScript the first time that, it's an entirely new language. It's not. Like I said, it's a superset of JavaScript. In about 2 hours, you'll be right at home writing it. And you can't debug TypeScript, which is not true at all. Like your browser will slurp it up. You can set breakpoints in it and immediately get to town troubleshooting the whole new set of bugs that you'll be writing with TypeScript. So also, this is a trend I've noticed just being online, going to Stack Overflow, looking for tutorials lately. Not just with Angular, but with every framework that's out there, every example, time spent in Stack Overflow. Almost all the code examples and solutions I see these days are written in ES6 code or TypeScript. So if you're not going to pick up TypeScript, it's going to be harder and harder for you to make sense of some of the examples that are out there. Promises versus observables. By the way, who knows where that fight symbol comes from? That fight sign. Thank you very much. Okay, I wish I could have included some sound bites from Street Fighter, but I could not, alas. Promises are, or observables are Angular's kind of answer, or an answer to the promise. There are some differences, and you may bounce off of these. You'll see a lot of observables and examples listed for Angular. They can be used pretty much like promises, but there's a whole lot of benefit to using them as opposed to promises. And here are some of the, very briefly, I mean, I could do several hours just on observables, and I'm just starting to get my head around all the benefits. Just this morning, I spent the last 3 days really looking at observables and functional style programming. You can get so much more out of observables than you can from promises. And here are just some of the top level things that a promise, you can't cancel it once, the name kind of infers that, it can't be broken. They will only fire one time, whereas subscriptions kind of open a channel for full duplex communication. Once you subscribe to an observable, that channel is open until you unsubscribe. And you can, unlike a promise, you can cancel them if you decide you don't need the info or you want to close the subscription. And if you're, rxmarbles.com gives a great high-level view of what observables are, because my first impression, like many others, is that they are arrays, but they're not. They are sort of like arrays, but they are arrays over time. Whereas you pass all the values in an array up front, an observable will pass information over time. It is handled very much like an array by anything consuming information from it. So you'll see lots of the same convenience methods like map, switch, all that, flatten, all that good stuff that you see in similar or analogous frameworks or libraries like Lodash, underscore, things like that. Okay, as I mentioned earlier, scope is gone. You can still access it if you absolutely must, but I have seen no reason for me to do it yet. It is. I think scope should be lit on fire and buried in a shallow grave someplace, so I'm glad to have it gone. Okay, everything is a component in Angular. There are structural functionality directives, and you're probably familiar with these from the name. ng4 is kind of the equivalent of ng-repeat. ngf unchanged there, with the exception of that asterisk on the front. Asterisk on the front. Okay, filters are gone. They have been replaced with pipes now. Some of the beloved filters I really liked, sort by and filter. The filter. They were fantastic. They are gone now. You can write your own implementation of these, but for performance reasons, the Angular developers decided to exclude them. That is unfortunate, and probably the thing I most miss from Angular 1. But there are easy ways around it. I've already written my own sorting services and filtering services, so easy peasy. Okay, the tooling, Angular CLI is primarily what we're going to talk about today. That's available through NPM, so you can quickly install that and get it up and running. And we'll look at that during our hands-on phase. Webpack, as I said, you don't have to know it, but who loves Webpack here? Anybody using it regularly? Okay, good. If you want to master all things Webpack, or you are a master of all things Webpack, Angular CLI supports a method to eject the stuff it does so that you can run Webpack on your own and do all the customization you want. NPM, I'm sure we're all familiar with it by now if we're doing any sort of front-end development. Don't really know what it stands for yet, but feel free to shout out a guess if you'd like. So that brings us to the end of the presentation proper. And I've only used about 15, 20 minutes. So I can walk you guys through some code. We may even have time to do both if you guys want to build something. Or I can walk you through a sample project first. Any preferences? Both? Okay. So let's start off with an existing project then. Make sure we touch on everything. First of all, well, let me walk you through setting up a project because it's a piece of cake. Just a few simple steps, but the middle step there gets to be a bit lengthy. So while I'm doing this, if somebody wants to shout out a question, I'd be happy to field a few. No questions at all yet? So long as you can set up the transpiler, which you can find pretty easily through NPM, it should be a piece of cake. And also that touches on something that I'd like to get to. Since JavaScript is a subset of TypeScript, and JavaScript will live happily inside of TypeScript files, you could take all of your existing JavaScript code, run it through a transpiler, a TypeScript transpiler, and it doesn't necessarily do anything for you apart from point out potential problems. If you've accidentally declared, because of a typo, a variable in the global namespace, TypeScript will the compiler will throw a compilation error and it'll let you know. So you can sniff out plenty of bugs like that. So there is a tremendous benefit, even if you don't adopt TypeScript, but running your JavaScript through a TypeScript compiler. Does that make sense? Sorry guys, I should have had this ready earlier. Okay, so I have Angular CLI installed. Just make sure. This will list the versions. Can you guys see that okay? Okay, so starting a new Angular CLI project is as easy as ng new, give it a name. Let's see, what's today's? We'll just call it my project. Okay, so this is going to download a whole bunch of stuff from NPM and get everything for our project, all the tooling squared away. So it's going to take a few minutes. I wish there were a progress indicator like there generally is when NPM is installing something, but they've not included that yet. Is there an existing conversion path for taking an Angular JS application and converting it to Angular? Right? No direct path, unfortunately, because they're just not backwards compatible. But there are many great guides out there. John Papa and Dan Wallin, the two of the guys I mentioned earlier, they have produced some great guides for that. So really, Stack Overflow can point you in a lot of good directions on that. And if you've been following John Papa's style guide for best practices, it will be pretty easier. So in fact, Brad and I know each other. You know Alan, right? He's trying to get all of our Angular code ready for that very kind of conversion. So he's following a bunch of the best practices and getting all that ready. Even though we won't be able to directly use any of his code, it will still help him to get ready for that conversion. Does that make sense? Okay. Are we done? All right. So Okay, I run the ng serve command. Oh, sorry. I'm already running something else on port 4200. Probably one of these projects. There we go. And there, our app is deployed. Thank you very much for your time. Our code is written. Have a good day. So it's, but I'm kidding, of course. There's not a fully deployable project there. But just think about, even with Angular 1, how much time it takes just to get to this step. To be able to pull down all that code, deploy something, and immediately serve it up is significant. And that's one of the main advantages of Angular CLI is it gets rid of a lot of that boilerplate repetitive stuff that you have to do between every project. Now let's see if I can bring up some code. Here's the app component. It is the root component of any project. And this gets back to what I was speaking about earlier about not being able to bootstrap your code with the ng app directive. This is the first component that will get served by the application. It lives with the root. But this is more of to point out one of the other benefits of Angular CLI. Now, a lot of you guys familiar with browser sync? Show of hands. Okay, for you guys. What browser sync does is it monitors directories for any changes while also serving up your application. Runs a proxy that your application gets served through, the front end of it anyway. So when it detects changes to these files, it simply refreshes your browser. So if I make changes to the code, my browser refreshed. Also works with the HTML as well. So it monitors all the files that you might change. When it detects changes to them, it refreshes your browser on that page. So that alone saves me probably half an hour a day. You guys see that okay? This is the command ng generate, takes many arguments. Amongst them are component, service, controller. No, I'm sorry, not controller. Services and components are the things you most often stand up. So those are the two first that immediately leap into mind. So you tell Angular CLI you want to generate a new component, you give it a name. By convention, it is dash separated, so my dash first, and then Angular CLI will tack on the word component to the end of it. It creates a folder. Looks like, see all the files that got spit out there. CSS for your component, the HTML for the component, a spec for your component, and the component itself. Again, that's like 15 minutes of setup time, right? So the benefit there is just I can't tell you guys how much time that has saved me. So we should see that now in our project files. There's my first component. So we can immediately now reference that because we should get into modules here. We haven't talked much about modules. I'm sure anybody not familiar with the concept of modules from Angular 1, it's very, very similar concept. So the app module holds all the declaration and import statements for other modules in your component. So you can see what Angular CLI also did for me when I created that component is it came into the app module and it jammed in. So you see there at line 12, my first component. So jam that guy in there so I can now reference it any place from within my project. So let's go back to the app component, the HTML, and let's quickly work in. Now, VS Code probably supports this. I imagine most IDEs do these days. It knows what my component names are. So I get autocomplete here. So I've now included my new directive, my new component underneath the app. So we should see, there you go. Make sense? Did I go too fast through that? Okay. Service is much the same. While we roll with the my first theme. Huh? Okay, one slight difference here. Services must be provided. There is, and there is an argument. I could have told Angular CLI with an argument that escapes my addled brain right now, provide the service immediately. So it would have gone back into the application module, and here it would have jammed in my first service. If I forgot to do that, I'll have to do it manually. There it is. And now from within my first component, now this code should look at a very high level, very familiar to the OO developers, right? We've got a constructor, we've got a class declaration, an implementation of an interface, import statements up at the top, annotations or decorators, as they may be known in your language of choice. All that stuff's there. You take full advantage of it. It has made JavaScript development much, much easier for me. Now, in the constructor, we'll inject the service that we just wrote. And let's go into that service. We've just added a method that will return a simple string. The ng-on-init method, that comes from the on-init interface, which we've implemented. You can see in the class declaration. ng-on-init is part of the component lifecycle for Angular. So as soon as a component is initialized, this method will get called. A lot of people just jam stuff like that in the constructor, but it's not a very good practice because your constructor will soon become crowded with garbage. There you go. So we've got a service and a component stood up in minutes. Was that a good enough example? Do you guys feel comfortable enough with services? And any questions about what we've seen so far? When I injected the service, so when I, sorry, the question was, did when I injected the service, not when I declared it or set it up. When I injected it, did Angular CLI do something? My IDE actually went out. When I declared this type, it automatically set up the import statement, which we're probably pretty familiar with from OO development. Your IDE will, when you make use of a class that you haven't imported yet, it automatically brings that import statement in. It also, if I were to remove the reference, it would pull it out too. But I think that's more in the domain of the IDE than Angular CLI. Okay, there are two projects that I've put together that I use quite a bit at home. Actually, the list manager, it's basically a to-do list that my wife and I use for groceries and to keep track of things that we need to do. And again, you guys can get that link later if you would like it. So we looked at Angular CLI's automation. Any questions about the CLI itself? I should at least point out, any questions first? Okay. It recently changed names. Let me. So it used to be Angular-CLI. So when you get around to installing this, if you're looking up examples on the interwebs, you might see that is deprecated now that Angular has moved out of beta. That was the beta version. It has become known as @Angular slash CLI, and that is kind of the naming convention they have used. Whoa. For all the stuff here. So if we open up package JSON, which is, that belongs to Node. You'll see here a lot of the Angular components. Let me drill in on that a little bit. So it's completely modularized now. Angular CLI, when you install the project is bringing in a lot of this stuff. But you could really theoretically just grab the things that you wanted to grab. All of these things are pretty essential to any Angular project, so they should be there. But for instance, any of you guys working with Angular Material? It's a component library for Angular 1. It's in version 2 now. It's in beta. I'm using it. If you want to talk shop about that, we can. But if you wanted to grab that or any other library that's out there that's underneath the Angular domain, it would be @Angular / and then what have you. So anything else anyone would like to see about basics and setup? Okay, then we'll look at that existing project now. Oh, let me kill the old one. Well, I can't see who's got port 42 now, 4200. Well, let's try this. I'm going to specify 4201. Yes, I know. No. Oh, nuts. Is I running from the terminal? Oh, yes, you are correct. Thank you. Who's that? Stick your hand up. Dang it. One more time. My man. All right. So to serve all these, this project from this proxy, everything's run in memory. So you get pretty good performance on it. But when you go to deploy your code, there's a command ng build that will bundle everything up using Webpack and place it wherever you would like. So that the code is optimized. It does tree shaking, so it gets rid of any dead code that you're not accessing through the project just yet. Really streamlines the code, concatenates it all. There are options for uglification so that you know, have your variable and method names hanging out in the wild there. This project is running now. All right, real straightforward to-do list. And also a nice window into my private life for anyone that wants to see it. I hope there's nothing embarrassing in any of these. Let me, sorry. There we go. Okay, so J&J Garden Center, which is up in my neck of the woods there. We're gonna be buying some stuff to do some garden work. So there you see some things that we need and some things that we've already done. The things in gray there and instruct through, we've already completed. I mean, it's all standard to-do list stuff, right? I almost hate to present this to you guys. I'm sorry, because that's pretty much what every example is a simple to-do list, but it is a good example. So, and just to demonstrate again, when I click on something on the list, it gets pushed to the bottom there. Okay. Like, I've got all my services in one directory. You can certainly break those up to modularize your code. A lot of folks bundle services with their components so that they can all be put into one module and then used any place you like. I generally, at least with shared services, create a dedicated folder for them. Here's our list service. So it runs out and fetches lists and bring them back. Am I getting way too far ahead for anybody? I can certainly back off. But if you're probably familiar with services from Angular 1, and these look very similar. I mean, with the exception of a TypeScript, they're almost identical. You don't have to jump through as many hoops to provide that service as you did with Angular 1, but the basic principles are still there. Sure. Okay. So the question was, can we look a little bit more at promises versus observables? We'll try to get a mad dash through it to at least introduce you to it. And in general, my services, if I have done my homework correctly, they should be returning. No, this is an early project, so I'm still returning promises. But let me, I happen to have some other stuff. Sorry? Yes, I was converting it to a promise because I did exactly what I told you guys not to do. So if there is one takeaway today, it is do what I say, not what I do. But just give you guys an idea of what I've been looking at the last few days and a glimpse at my email if you guys really want to see it. Okay, this is the RX observable framework or library that I'm working with here. This gives you a really quick view at kind of what is under the hood with observables and the asynchronicity of them. So we've got a source here. The observable library it has lots of syntactic sugar for creating your own observables. We can create an observable here, which takes an observer as an argument. And let me back off a minute. I don't want to lose the folks that haven't had the opportunity to look at TypeScript yet. Here's a much better, these don't even involve any libraries. This is just writing your own observable. Gives you a very high level view of what observables do. They handle subscriptions. They take an observer as an argument, and then they generally have a next method. The observer has a next method, a complete method, and an error method. So at any time I can call, when I subscribe to an observer, I can pass the next value. So what will be logged there in the console once this code runs is just 1, 2, 3, and then complete. And then after that, you see there, because of the set timeout at line 5, we'll log 4. And I know that that's not doing the topic justice at all. Is there anything specific that you'd like me to address? Sorry, I've lost track of the gentleman that raised his hand. Was that even in the ballpark of the answer you're looking for? Okay. You can change subscriptions. Let me, first of all, promise this later, rxmarbles.com. So this does a great job of explaining how observables work as kind of like arrays over time. rxmarbles.com. We'll see that link again later. Do you have an Egghead account? Pluralsight, there are some great tutorials out there to kind of walk you through the basics. I think my biggest obstacle was I didn't have a really good understanding of functional reactive programming. So after having spent some time with that, I really started to appreciate observables a little bit better. So it might be good if you really want to get into observables to have a look at that first. I think I put the cart before the horse and tried to get too far into observables before I really understood what was going on under the hood. No, that's a great question. Are they wrappers for generators? Observables, no, because generators still require somebody to pull information from them. I have to get the next value out of it, right? I have to request that next value. Because with observables, you're opening a subscription channel. So I'm just listening now. It is a push system, so that what is being observed actually pushes information to the subscription. Does that make sense? Anything else you guys want to see? I'm just kind of picking through the code, looking for something, but I think we've done better with taking questions from the crowd. Plus, you'll probably get a free Frisbee if you ask a question. Still got about 10 minutes left, so we can use that time to break out and get some hands-on code. I can come, is anybody here tried Angular and bounced off? Anything they need help trying to stand up? I talked with some of you guys before the class. Well, goodness, I hate to cheat you out of 10 minutes. Oh, yeah. Okay, so why Angular and not React? Kind of pros and cons of each approach, and that should get to something that Brad had asked earlier too. I'm sorry, I'm glad he reminded me. I think the best, I'll start off with objective stuff and finish off with subjective stuff. React is a library, okay? So it concerns itself only with rendering HTML quickly, renders views. So it is only the view component of your application, which means it is great to be worked into any project, any existing project. So if you guys don't have a green field, React might be the way to go. You'll definitely get up and running faster. If you have a green field, and this is kind of your first big framework-based project with JavaScript, you could go the React route, but you'll also need to worry about state management, services, communicating with your server, all those things that React does not do out of the box. It pairs well with other things, particularly Redux for state management, and you can kind of roll your own services and bundle them in. Whereas on the other hand, Angular is a one-stop shop. You're getting everything, the component management, the state management, services, all that stuff right out of the box. So if I had a green field, I would probably tend toward Angular. If I did not, I would almost certainly go React. Are you guys using jQuery right now or something? Yeah. Right, and I am kind of a champion of Angular, obviously, but if I had to like get away from jQuery, because once upon a time jQuery was great. I mean, who remembers IE6, right? I mean, you guys code through that. jQuery was a savior, right? But there have been so many advancements, then there's sites dedicated now to, do you really need jQuery for your project? And React can do a ton of stuff for you there, a ton of good really fast. And you can even work React into an Angular project. So there's kind of some thought that the two are like, you know, oil and water, but they're not at all. They, because React just renders components, it can live happily inside of an Angular project. The virtual DOM, okay? It is something similar, but it does more optimization. It's not doing exactly the same thing as React does by using the shadow DOM, right? But there's still lots of optimization there. For pure rendering of components, React still has an edge, but much less of an edge than it did against Angular, or much less of an edge now than it did against Angular 1. Angular 2 is about 5 times faster. But if you've got some real serious view rendering issues, React is definitely worth a look. Anyone else? Brad, did that answer your question as well? Okay. Okay, we've got about 6 minutes. 6 minutes.
All right, I have a question. Maybe this is kind of basic, but when you created your component that were kind of automatic flows, I kind of view components as small, encapsulated, isolated. But if you have a massive sprawl in the app, you're gonna have lots. What's the relationship between components and apps, and how do you determine which components run when?
They all get called through HTML, right? So when you create, it's a great question, and it also gets to something that I really failed to take a look at with you guys. When you set up a new component, you create a selector for it. This is basically the directive name, right? So it's the tag name for your directive, right? So in our app component HTML, there's going to be what lives at the very root level of the application. And you can see there at line 15, I've got a router outlet. By the way, if you're familiar with how poorly routing worked in Angular 1, you know, a lot of people turn to UI router, third-party solutions to get routing done. That is so much more easily accomplished through Angular 2. You don't have to go to an outside source to solve that problem. It supports nested views right out of the box. So really easy to use. But you can see here that the root level component is very simple. And then we route to our, what I would call page level components, which represent your different views, your different URL paths, right? And then anything under that you would call, so there are small single purpose components. Does that make sense? Okay. And a lot of folks, like you can see in this project, all my components live at the root of the app directory. We've got login, modal, notifications, all that good stuff. But you can certainly modularize all that. Your module, your app module, can import other modules. So it makes your code, well, more modular, for lack of a better word. So really easy to bundle your stuff up into small modules as opposed to one monolithic module that I represented here. So again, do what I say, not what I do, right? It's a much better way to organize your code than you can see in this project. Of course, it is a small project. It's probably not the big sprawling app that you've alluded to. That answer your question?
Yeah.
Okay. I thought I said.
Just had a comment. There's a tool, a Chrome extension you can get called Augury, Angular Augury, and you can view the component tree, how your component tree is kind of composed in order to see how your app is organized, essentially. And that makes it really easy.
Last URL there, augury.angular.io. Great tool. I haven't spent much time with it yet, but I saw at NGConf a good demo of it, and I was really impressed with it. Links for follow-up here. The first two there are right out of NGConf. So if you weren't fortunate enough to attend that, you can at least get some of the benefit of some of the great stuff that was presented there. The second from the bottom is the link for these slides. I'll come back to that. So feel free to get on there, pull any information you want out of it. And Augury, as we mentioned, is a great tool. So that having been said, if there are any follow-up questions that occur to you, feel free to reach out by email. And yes, remember, hand shot first. So did Alderon. Thank you very much for your time. Appreciate it. Heads up.